The chalet's fireplace crackled like a steadfast sentinel against the howling void outside. Elias Vorn leaned closer to the flames, his breath visible in the frigid air even indoors. The alpine storm had raged for days, draping the mountains in a suffocating white shroud. He'd come here to study Arctic foxes, not to host a battle against hypothermia. Thud. He froze. The sound was faint, swallowed by the wind, but it didn't belong. Wolves didn't knock. Grabbing his rifle, Elias shouldered open the door. Snow lashed his face, and for a moment, he saw nothing but the blizzard's wrath. Then a flicker of movement, a silhouette crumpled near the woodpile. "Hello?" he shouted, squinting. Two figures huddled together, a tall, willowy woman clutching a child. Their skin glimmered faintly, like ice under moonlight, and intricate silver patterns traced their faces, pulsing weakly. The woman's eyes met his, wide, pupil-less, and desperate. She rasped a word that sounded like Vatha before collapsing. Elias didn't hesitate. He hauled them inside, their bodies lighter than expected, and laid them by the fire. The child, a boy, stirred first, his markings flaring as he whimpered. Elias wrapped them in blankets and heated broth. "Easy," he murmured, offering a mug. The woman recoiled initially, then sniffed the steam. Her nostrils flared, and she drank greedily, guiding the boy to do the same. Their language was melodic, alien, but exhaustion transcended words. The boy coughed, a sound like shattering glass, and the woman tensed. Elias gestured to his medical kit, raising a bandage questioningly. She nodded, and he treated their frostbite, noting their elongated fingers and translucent nails. When the boy slept, the woman touched her chest. "Saren." She pointed to the child. "Kale." "Elias," he replied, tapping his own chest. Saren's gaze swept the room, lingering on a framed photo of Elias's late sister. Her hand hovered over it, questioning. "Family," he said softly. Saren's eyes brimmed with liquid silver. She pulled a pendant from her tunic, a tiny crystalline orb containing swirling light, and pressed it to her forehead, then to Kale's. Elias recognized grief when he saw it. As night deepened, Saren hummed a haunting tune, her voice resonating in ways no human throat could. Kale's markings brightened in response, his breathing easing. Elias watched, awed, until Saren suddenly gripped his wrist. "Rishtal," she whispered, pointing outside. "Danger." The storm answered with a roar. Something was out there. But for now, the fire burned. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel alone. Morning crept into the chalet like a thief, pale light seeping through ice-fringed windows. The storm had quieted to a murmur, but the air still hummed with unease. Elias woke to the sound of rustling. Saren stood by the hearth, her silver-etched fingers tracing the charred wood of the mantel. Her head tilted, listening, to the wind, or something else. Kale slept fitfully on the couch, his faintly luminous skin duller than the night before. Elias noted the boy's labored breathing. Whatever sickness plagued him, the cold had only sharpened its teeth. "Coffee?" Elias offered, holding up a mug. Saren blinked at him, her pupil-less eyes narrowing in curiosity. He mimed drinking, then handed it to her. She sniffed, recoiled at the bitterness, but took a tentative sip. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by something resembling a smile. "Coffee," she repeated, the syllables crisp but melodic. "Close enough," Elias chuckled. Breakfast was a quiet affair, oatmeal sweetened with dried berries, shared in gestures rather than words. Saren ate sparingly, her gaze darting to the windows. When Elias pulled out a sketchpad from his research supplies, her posture shifted. She pointed urgently at the paper, then at herself. "You want to draw?" he asked. She nodded, and he slid the pad across the table. Her fingers trembled as she sketched. The first image was a jagged shape, a ship, Elias realized, plunging toward a mountain range. Flames engulfed its hull. Beside it, she drew stick figures fleeing, their bodies marked with the same silver patterns she and Kale bore. Vathery, she said, tapping the figures. Home, gone. Elias leaned closer. Your people? Your home planet? She shook her head, frustration tightening her features. Instead, she drew a second image, a world cracked open, cities burning under a blackened sky. Above it loomed a massive vessel, its design predatory, all sharp angles and claw-like protrusions. Rishtal, she spat, stabbing the paper. The word dripped with venom. Enemies, Elias guessed. Saren nodded. She mimed firing a weapon, then gripped her own arm, her expression twisting in pain. When she pulled back her sleeve, Elias saw faint scars along her wrist, jagged, deliberate. She pointed to Kale, asleep on the couch, and drew a tear down her cheek. Vathery, Kithra, she whispered, touching her throat. She pantomimed drinking, then clutched her chest and gagged. Understanding dawned cold and grim. They want something from you. Your blood? Saren's eyes widened. She nodded, then gestured to the chalet's walls, the mountains beyond. Rishtal, here. Soon. Elias's chest tightened. He'd assumed their pursuers were a distant threat, but Saren's urgency suggested otherwise. He fetched his binoculars and scanned the valley below. Nothing moved in the snow-blanketed silence. Yet. By midday, Kale stirred. His fever had broken, but his movements were sluggish, his markings flickering like a guttering candle. Saren hovered near him, humming that unearthly melody again. The sound seemed to steady him, his breaths deepening. Elias busied himself reinforcing the chalet's doors and shutters. He'd stockpiled supplies for months of solitude, food, fuel, ammunition, but a siege against unknown forces? He wasn't naive enough to think his rifle would tip the scales. When he returned inside, Kale was sitting up, watching him with wary interest. The boy pointed to Elias's gloves, then to his own bare hands. His fingers flexed, and frost spiderwebbed across the nearby windowpane. Whoa, Elias breathed. Saren said something sharp to Kale, and the frost melted. The boy ducked his head, chastised, but Elias grinned. It's okay, he said, kneeling beside the couch. He pulled off his glove and held out his palm. Show me. Kale glanced at his mother. After a tense pause, Saren nodded. The boy placed his hand over Elias's, and a delicate lattice of ice bloomed across his skin. It didn't burn, just a cool, almost tickling sensation. Incredible, Elias murmured. Kithra, Saren said, tapping Kale's chest. Life. Power. Rishtal, take. Elias's smile faded. They hunt you for this? She nodded, then gestured to the boy. Kale, strong. Too strong. They smell him. The pieces fell into place. Kale's worsening condition wasn't just illness, it was a beacon. That evening, Elias taught Saren to play chess. She grasped the rules quickly, her strategy ruthless and unorthodox. Kale watched, nibbling on a ration bar, until he tugged Elias's sleeve and pointed to a framed map of the Alps. Where? He asked in halting English. Home. Elias guessed. You want to know where we are? The boy nodded. Elias traced the mountain range, then pointed to their valley. Safety? Kale asked. For now. Saren's gaze lingered on the map. She retrieved the sketchpad and drew a rough approximation of the chalet, then a path leading northeast. Ship, she said. Medicine. Save Kale. Elias's stomach dropped. Your crashed ship has medicine he needs? She nodded, her eyes pleading. 3 days. Walk. In this? Elias gestured to the snowdrifts outside. It's suicide. Kale die, she said simply. Silver tears welled but didn't fall. No choice. Elias studied the sketch. The coordinates she'd marked were deep in the most treacherous part of the range, a place even seasoned climbers avoided. But the boy's wheezing filled the silence between them. We'll need gear, he said at last. And a way to find the ship. Saren reached into her tunic and withdrew a palm-sized crystal, its core throbbing faintly. Guide, she said. Vathari tech. Broken, but feels ship. Elias took it. The crystal warmed in his hand, pulsing slower to the northeast. A compass, of sorts. We leave at dawn, he said. Saren exhaled sharply, her shoulders slumping in relief. But as Elias turned to gather supplies, she caught his arm. Rishtal, close, she warned. Hear them. Machines. He frowned. Machines? She pointed to her ear, then the floor. Under snow. Follow. A tracker. Of course. They'd survived the crash, but their hunters had still planted a way to find them. Elias's mind raced. If the Rishtal were near, a trek to the ship would lead the enemy straight to it, and to the chalet. Can you disable it? He asked. Saren shook her head. Need ship tools. Elias swore under his breath. They were out of time, out of options. But as he glanced at Kale, the boy now sketching a lopsided Arctic fox in the margins of the map, he knew retreat wasn't an option. Then we move fast, he said. And hope the storm comes back. That night, Elias dreamed of ice. Saren stood at the edge of a frozen lake, Kale's hand in hers. The Rishtal ship descended, its shadow swallowing the light. When he woke, sweat-drenched and gasping, the chalet was silent. But outside, the wind had shifted. Snowflakes hissed against the windows, not falling but sliding, as if pulled by a magnet. Elias peered through the glass and saw it, a faint red light pulsing beneath the snowdrift near the woodpile. Saren joined him, her breath catching. Tracker, she whispered. The light flared once, then died. Somewhere, far below the snow, something clicked. The pre-dawn air bit like a serrated blade as Elias tightened the straps of his snowshoes. Saren stood beside him, her breath crystallizing in the gloom. She had fashioned a makeshift sling for Kale, bundling him against her chest beneath layers of thermal blankets. The boy's eyes were half-lidded, his markings dim. Stay close, Elias said, though he knew she couldn't understand. He tapped the crystal compass she'd given him, its pulse quickened when he faced northeast. Saren nodded, adjusting the plasma pistol strapped to her thigh, scavenged from the chalet's hidden weapons cache. Elias hadn't asked why she'd brought it. They set off into the white void. The first few hours were a slog through waist-deep snowdrifts. Elias broke the trail, his muscles screaming, while Saren scanned the slopes with predatory focus. The mountains loomed like ancient sentinels, their peaks hidden in cloud. By midday, the crystal's glow intensified, throbbing in time with Elias's heartbeat. Ship near, Saren signed, a language they'd cobbled together from gestures and shared urgency. A low rumble echoed through the valley. Elias froze. Avalanche. He grabbed Saren's arm and lunged behind a granite outcrop as the mountainside shuddered. Snow cascaded past, a roaring tidal wave that buried their trail and sealed them in a suffocating silence. When the air cleared, their path forward had vanished. Saren clutched Kale, her fingers trembling. The boy's lips were blue. We need to keep moving, Elias said, though his own lungs burned. They navigated the fresh debris, the compass guiding them upward. As dusk approached, the temperature plummeted. Saren's steps grew unsteady, her silver veins flickering erratically. When she collapsed against a boulder, Elias caught her. Cold, too much, she signed, her hands sluggish. Kale whimpered, his small hand brushing her cheek. Saren's markings flared weakly in response, as if channeling the last of her strength into him. Elias unzipped his parka and wrapped it around her. "We're close," he insisted, though the compass had gone dark. A shrill whine pierced the air. Saren's head snapped up. Rishtal drone. Elias shoved them behind a snowbank as a metallic orb streaked overhead, its red scanner sweeping the terrain. It paused, hovering above their hiding spot. Saren raised her pistol, but Elias stayed her hand. "Wait." The drone descended, its underside hissing open. A clawed probe extended, scraping the snow. Elias held his breath. Then, with a metallic chirp, it retracted and zipped away. "It didn't see us?" Elias signed. Saren touched Kale's forehead. "His Kithra hides us." Weak now. Elias's throat tightened. They were running on borrowed time. Nightfall found them at the ship. It was half buried in a crevasse, its hull a jagged maw of twisted metal. Saren staggered toward it, whispering what sounded like a prayer. Inside, the corridors were frozen tombs, littered with icicle-encrusted debris. Saren led Elias to a sealed chamber, her hands shaking as she input a code into a crystalline panel. The door hissed open, revealing rows of vials filled with iridescent liquid. Saren grabbed two, injecting one into Kale's neck. The boy gasped, his markings blazing like struck flint. Color returned to his cheeks. "Thank you," Saren signed, tears freezing on her skin. Elias nodded, but his relief died as he spotted a console flickering nearby. The screen displayed a map, a blinking red dot overlaid on the Alps. "Their chalet." "Tracker," Saren growled. "They know." Elias's radio crackled to life. A garbled voice spoke in German, "Search team to base, specimens located." "Moving in." Human mercenaries, Elias realized. "They're working with the Rishtal." Saren smashed the console, her fury raw. "Go. Now." They fled the ship as another avalanche shook the mountains. Behind them, the crevasse collapsed, burying the Vathari vessel, and the last hope of erasing their trail. The chalet's windows glowed like a beacon in the twilight. Elias's breath came in ragged bursts as they crested the final ridge. 2 days of forced marches, of evading drones and avalanches, had left them hollow-eyed and frostbitten. Saren's strength waned with every step, her body sapped by the cold and Kale's reliance on her fading Kithra. "Almost there," Elias urged. A gunshot cracked the silence. They dove behind a boulder as another bullet ricocheted off the stone. Below, 6 figures in white Arctic gear fanned out around the chalet. "Rishtal puppets," Saren signed. Elias counted the mercenaries. "They're human. I'll draw their fire. Get Kale inside." She gripped his arm. "No. Together." He hesitated, then nodded. They slid down the slope, using the snowdrifts for cover. At the chalet's rear, Elias disabled the tripwire he'd rigged days earlier and kicked open the door. The interior had been ransacked, supplies scattered, furniture overturned. A mercenary lay sprawled near the fireplace, his throat slit. Elias recognized the knife in the man's hand as his own. "They found the cache," he muttered. Saren set Kale on the couch and activated her pistol. "Prepare." Elias barricaded the doors with the overturned table and reloaded his rifle. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. "Elias Vorn," a voice boomed. "Hand over the specimens, and we'll make it quick." "Specimens?" Elias snarled. "They're people. Their property," the mercenary replied. "Last chance." Saren pressed a device into Elias's hand, a jagged shard of Vathari tech. "Distraction," she signed, then pointed to the roof. He understood. Elias shouldered his rifle and fired blindly through a window. As the mercenaries returned fire, Saren leapt onto the chimney ledge, her pistol blazing. 3 men fell, their bodies dissolving into ash. The survivors scrambled for cover. "Now!" Elias shouted. He slammed the shard into the chalet's generator. The tech flared, sending a pulse of energy through the wiring. Light bulbs exploded, and the radio tower on the roof hummed to life, emitting a high-pitched whine. The remaining mercenaries clutched their ears, screaming. Saren picked them off one by one, her movements precise, lethal. But the victory was short-lived. A shadow blotted out the moon, a Richtl dropship, its hull bristling with weapons. It fired a plasma beam, shearing off the chalet's east wing. Elias tackled Kale as the room erupted in flames. "Beacon, activate!" Saren yelled, dragging Elias toward the radio tower. She jammed her crystal pendant into the tower's console. The air vibrated as a signal pierced the atmosphere, a Vathari distress call. The dropship fired again. Elias woke to the smell of antiseptic and the hum of alien machinery. He lay in a Vathari medbay, his wounds sealed beneath translucent biogel. Saren sat beside him, her markings restored to their luminous glow. "You live," she signed, her smile weary. "Where's Kale?" She gestured to a viewing portal. Outside, the boy floated in zero gravity with other Vathari children, his laughter echoing through the comms. Frost danced from his fingertips, shaping intricate ice sculptures. The resistance commander, a scarred warrior named Tovin, entered. "You shielded Saren and the child," he said via translator. "Our people owe you a debt." Elias sat up gingerly. "What happens now?" "We retreat to the stars. The Richtl will retaliate." Tovin offered a crystalline data chip. "Join us. Your courage is uncommon in your species." Elias glanced at Saren. Her eyes held a silent plea, but he shook his head. "Earth doesn't know any of this is real. If I leave, the Richtl will keep coming. Someone has to warn my people." Tovin inclined his head. "Then we gift you this." He placed a holoprojector on the bed, a recording of the Richtl's atrocities, their experiments on Vathari, and star maps of their territory. "Make them believe." Weeks later, Elias stood at a United Nations podium, the holoprojector glowing beside him. Skeptical murmurs filled the room until he activated it. Gasps erupted as Saren's face appeared, recounting the fall of Vathar in her haunting tongue. Kale's frost magic played on loop, irrefutable. "They're not specimens," Elias said, his voice steady. "They're refugees. And if we don't stand together, Earth is next." The vote to ally with the Vathari passed by a single margin. Years blurred. Elias became a liaison, splitting his time between Geneva and Alpine research stations. He never married, never settled. The mountains were enough.